Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, we're headed to the Mississippi River town of Belmont, which sits on the Missouri side of the Great Waterway along a bend that forms a border with the state of Kentucky. Here, on November 7th, 1861, newly commissioned Brigadier General Ulysses S. Grant took the offense when he and about 3,100 Union soldiers traveled by steamboat to a landing at Belmont, then attacked Confederates in the vicinity and burned their camp. Historians consider the fight inconclusive and a morale booster for Grant's raw troops and for he himself. At the end of the battle, Grant's men withdrew to the transports waiting for them along the Mississippi River at the Belmont Landing. In this precarious moment, four soldiers from the 7th Iowa Infantry hurried back to the battlefield to rescue their popular Lieutenant Colonel Augustus Wentz, who had been struck on the side by a bullet and left behind. As Confederate cannon fire continued to sweep the area, the men carried Wentz to the base of a large tree stump. They worried that enemy infantry was on its way. It was obvious that Wentz would not survive his wound, and they decided to save themselves. After two of the soldiers departed, a third soon followed. The last man stayed with Wentz until he died, and then left to join his comrades. One of those four soldiers is pictured here, 18-year-old Private John Wesley Pierson. He made his way to the river as fast as possible. A slight wound to his right leg from a stray bullet earlier in the day may have slowed him down. In any event, by the time he got to the landing, the transports were gone. Years later, Pierson told his story in the regimental history. I arrived in time to see our boats pulling away, leaving myself and others on the bank with the enemy. I was called on to surrender, which I did, and was soon hustled to the rear. Indeed, for a strategically inconclusive battle, it was a terrible day for the Iowans. More than half its men were killed, wounded, or captured at Belmont. 227 of 410 men engaged. A sawyer and farmhand who had moved as a boy from New Jersey to Iowa with his family, Pierson numbered among 39 men from the 7th Iowa who fell into enemy hands that day. The Confederates transported them to Tennessee and imprisoned them in an old slave pen in Memphis. They were later transferred to Memphis Medical College, which had been converted into a prison. Pierson recalled, we stayed here several months, sometimes going 2 or 3 days without anything to eat. On the last day of February 1862, the prisoners received word that they would be moved to a new location the next day. Pierson saw an opportunity to get away. He wrote, now I imagined if I could conceal myself, I could make my escape. So I immediately began to look for a place to hide. The house was large with several rooms and 3 stories high. After searching some time for a place, I decided there was but one, and that was under the stairway leading up to the attic. He recruited 2 comrades to act with him. The 3 men, with the help of other prisoners, raised the steps just enough to allow them to wedge themselves underneath. The Confederates soon discovered the missing inmates during a roll call. Pierson noted they, believing that we were somewhere in the house, searched every nook and corner with their revolvers in their hands, swearing they would kill us if they found us. But Pierson and his comrades remained undiscovered, hiding with 2 canteens of water and a few blankets. They finally made their escape 6 days later. Pierson remembered, we started north and were soon on the business street of the city, ragged and dirty, and so weak we could hardly walk. Once outside Memphis, they struck through the woods and swamps. They scrounged food from country folk in isolated cabins and avoided military outposts. On one occasion, Pierson recalled, they happened upon a log hut inhabited by an intensely loyal Southern woman. Unaware that the men were Union soldiers, she fed them dinner. After supper, Pierson noted, the lady wanted to know where we were going, and of course, we were going to join the Confederate Army. She asked our opinion concerning the war and how it would terminate. Of course, we gave favorable answers to all the questions, which were many. Pierson continued, she said she hoped the war never would be in her part of the country, but if it was, she had enough strychnine in the house to kill a dozen Yanks, and she would use it too. Of course, I was no Yankee, for I believe that woman was in earnest. We retired for the night and had a splendid night's rest. After eating a hearty breakfast, we set out on our journey and have a very good spirit. Several days later, on March 18th, they were recaptured by Confederates. Pierson stated that the rebel troops had orders to arrest anyone, white or black, that was going north or south, east or west, that did not have papers to show who they were or where they were going. The Confederates transported Pierson and his comrades to a prison in nearby Jackson. Pierson described the holding place. The jail was made of wood and lined with heavy timbers, set endways and driven full of nails so that a mouse could not have escaped. We fared well and had many visitors. All seemed sociable enough except one schoolmarm from the northern states. She thought we ought to be hung, possibly to keep herself from hanging. The men remained in prison until April 6th, when the Battle of Shiloh changed the fortunes of Pierson and his fellow prisoners. He wrote, the authorities of the town, becoming uneasy as a result of the battle, now in full blast at Shiloh and distinctly heard by us, put us aboard the cars and started south with us to Corinth, Mississippi, where we landed about dark and were placed in a small house with a sign over the door, Secession Saloon, with 12 guards to guard us. They had orders to shoot us if we tried to get away, and things looked like we were there to stay. The building being 2 stories high, they abused us some and told us to try and get away, for they wanted a chance to shoot a Yankee. On a rainy day, shortly after Pierson arrived in Corinth, hundreds of Union soldiers captured at Shiloh were marched through town and passed just outside the building where he was confined. Pierson saw another lucky opportunity. He recalled the guards, anxious to see the Yanks, rushed to the door. I took my departure through the back door, up the steps, and in a moment was followed by one of the other boys. Looking around for a weapon, Pierson grabbed a wagon spoke to use as a club. We were soon halted by a guard and advanced to give the countersign, seized the end of his gun and hit him over the head, and then ran out of the way. Pierson and the other escapee plowed through mud and rain and disappeared into the night. But as misfortune would have it, they wandered into bands of Confederate troops returning from Shiloh. Pierson noted, they were so scattered that it was impossible to find a hiding place. He and his comrade avoided the light of flickering torches carried by the Confederates that night and kept enough distance not to be recognized during the day. Yet they were close enough to hear bits and pieces of conversation and thus learn that Southern arms had been defeated in the battle. They passed the defeated Confederate army undetected. We decided we were out of danger if we did not lose our way, Pierson wrote. At dusk that day, the 2 men happened upon a house. No one was home. They went inside and discovered some molasses and parched coffee. They took a bit of both and ran a short distance into the woods to get some sleep. The men awoke the next morning and watched the house for signs of any activity. A woman appeared and they approached her. I asked the nearest road to the Confederate camp. Pierson remembered. She stepped to the end of the porch, pointed down the road, and said it was a half mile to where they were guarding a bridge. Just at this time, we heard drums beating to our left. On inquiring where they were, she said, my goodness, man, don't go over there or the Yankees will get you. In this moment, a Southern loyal man stepped through the door behind her and asked if one of them would come inside. Pierson entered and saw 8 or 10 men sitting around another man lying in bed. He turned out to be a Confederate lieutenant who had been badly wounded. One of the men gathered around the injured officer, a doctor, who handed Pierson a note that read, "Lieutenant wounded so bad we dare not move him. Send orders at once." The doctor asked Pierson to give this to the lieutenant at the bridge. Moved by the scene, but unwilling to risk being captured, Pierson and his comrades headed toward the bridge until they were out of sight of the house and those 8 or 10 men and the doctor, then stuck the note on a bush by the roadside and headed in the opposite direction toward the Union drums. After walking a while, they paused at a swamp to consider their next move. While they got their bearings, Pierson recalled, "We saw a man 40 or 50 yards away. We hid behind a log. We rose up and told him to halt, which he did. We asked him what army he belonged to. In a kind of positive way, he said, 'The Union Army, of course.' I asked him what regiment he belonged to. He said, 'The 57th Illinois.' I asked him his colonel's name and his division commander, which names were familiar to me. Satisfying ourselves that he was a Union man, we told him we wanted to go to his camp, which he allowed we were joking, but seemed willing to go, leading off and we following. Within 3 minutes, we were inside of the line. They found the hospital where they encountered a doctor who gave us a drink of wine, examined our pulse, and pronounced us in critical condition. He ordered us some potato soup and hardtack and watched us to keep us from eating too much. The next day, they were finally returned to their comrades in the 7th, more than 5 months after their capture at Belmont. We were met with a hurrah. After a short stay with the company," Pierson recalled, "the colonel took me to Grant's headquarters, where I stayed some time and then returned to my regiment, but was not able for duty for several weeks." Pierson declined to re-enlist after his 3-month term of enlistment expired in 1864. He mustered out of the Army as a corporal and returned to Iowa. The following year, in 1865, he married and started a family that grew to include 5 children. They later settled in Missouri, where Pierson lived until age 62. He died in 1906. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.